here. And am I being mic'd? Everybody's hearing me okay?
Yeah.
All right, well, I'd like to welcome you all to the Long Poem Conference. This is the first panel reading, kind of a little different than what's going to follow. And then tomorrow we kick it up again at 10. So I hope to see you all again. One little bit of news, Marjorie Perloff will not be with us in the flesh. She's going to stay in California and will be teleconferencing then. So that's the one addendum to the thing. And I feel like the first thing I'm going to do is thank everybody who has been part of this. First of all, the Payment Center for this wonderful room and the AV equipment. And tomorrow there'll be a reception after the conference, and you're all welcome to come and have free wine and so forth. And so we want to thank them first of all, and then the Department of English and Comparative Literature, which is where I teach. I'm Michael Golston. I teach in the Department of English, and they're co-sponsoring. Also, the Institute for Israel and Jewish Studies at Columbia University helped us out with a huge financial kind of gift. That's really wonderful. And then Dibur Literary Journal, which is out of Stanford, out of the, I guess, the Hebrew Studies. Is that right? I don't really know what the... Yes, Barrett.
Comparative literature.
Okay, comparative literature. And I'll talk a little bit about how this whole thing got started. First of all, my co-conspirators are here. That was Vered Shemtov, who is the head editor of Dibur. Is that right?
Yeah, we've done that last night.
Okay. And Yuri Cohen, who teaches at Tel Aviv University. And so this all got started probably 10 years ago. Yuri was teaching at Columbia and was my upstairs neighbor. And he has little kids, and my daughter became his babysitter, among other things. This is really interesting, I'm sure. And we, the two of us, and another neighbor who was he's a neuropsychologist or something. Yes, Italian fellow. We decided we were going to read poetry together and just sort of have these kinds of, academic male bonding things. And so everybody brought poems to the activity, and I brought some Ezra Pound because nobody had really looked at him much. And that sort of started this whole idea and this whole interest kind of in a long poem thing. We talked about people like Louis Zukowski, some of these other epic poets and stuff, modernists. And that's kind of where it all started. And then last spring, Vered invited me to come out to Stanford to talk about possibly co-editing an issue of this journal with Yuri. So we decided that was a good idea, and then we decided also to have a conference where we could bring people together and we could get massive papers going and stuff like that. So that's kind of the backstory. Now, what's going to happen today is that I'm going to, obviously we're going to feature these two poets, Greg Dworkin and Bob Cohen. And I'm going to say a few things first about sort of the focus of the conference, what we hope maybe to accomplish, some ideas and some questions really about the long poem, why this should be of interest for anybody. And then I'm going to introduce Craig, and he'll read first, and then I will introduce Bob, and he'll read second. And then we'll have a brief conversation, the three of us, and then we'll open it up to audience questions and participation. Okay? All right. And yes?
There's somehow fancy scroll.
Oh, I was going to mention that. Bob's long poem that he's going to be reading, which is called Beyond Water.
But before.
There we go. Before Water.
Really?
Beyond Water.
No, no.
Oh, my whole speech is ridiculous.
I text to do that before.
Before Water is accompanied by a
No, it's primal, before.
Okay. Bob's,
It's not transcendental. It's beyond.
Bob's wife is Francie Shaw, a really wonderful visual artist, and she painted this scroll. Is that right? Yeah, painted this. It's a
It's
long.
part of a performance piece.
Yes, that accompanies Before Water. So we invite everybody to take a look at that. That's actually being unwrapped, I think as we speak, by Carla Nielsen, who's our rare books and manuscripts librarian. the scroll is very delicate apparently, and it's probably not going to be shown again for a long time. So if you want to, you can go get a gander at that after we're done. Okay. All right, well, I wanted to just, again, lay out a couple of points and questions that at least are of interest to me, possibly everybody else, I'm not sure. It's this idea of the long poem. And first off, I want to say one thing about long poems is they are not short. They are long. But I think it's really interesting. Part of the question of the long poem for me is really the question of scale, poetic scale. So the question would be, what does length invite and make possible in a poem? We have the short poem, the lyric poem. Of course, in some ways, the long poem is actually is probably more primal than the short poem if you think of the Homeric epics and oral epic poetry and so forth. But the idea is this question of scale. So what does length really make happen in a poem? For one thing, I'm really curious about when does a poem become long? There's a moment at which you must go something like, at what point do we say this is a long poem? And are there medium poems? We could have a medium poem conference maybe next year. Or, in other words, you go, this poem just got long. I mean, there's got to be some kind of place where a poem suddenly pitches into length. And I don't know what it is. I'm not sure that we're going to want to do this sort of generic nitpicking here, that's for sure. But come on in, there's seats. Sorry. Because but it's not entirely uninteresting. So last year, the poet Robert Grenier was visiting campus and was in my office. And Grenier is famous for writing exceedingly short poems, like 2-word poems, 1-word poem with a letter that's wrong, or 3 or 4-word poems sometimes. Other types of poems, but that's what he's known for. And I told him about the long poem conference, and he looked a little crestfallen because he knew we were probably not going to be talking about it. But then he asked, well, if I look at a poem for a long time, does it become a long poem? And I just thought this was brilliant. There might be a way that you could actually sort of think of a certain kind of short poem as actually, if it engages you for a certain amount of time, it actually does become something like a long poem. So I thought that was really interesting. But let me say a couple of other things about long poems. So like this scroll that we're going to look at, long poems stretch. They can be a stretch of thinking. If you think of Larry Eigner's way of talking about a line of poetry, that it can be a stretch of thinking. So there's a certain kind of stretching that might go on. I'm going to be somewhat fanciful here. As Peter Middleton puts it, Peter Middleton will be joining us tomorrow. He's teaching right now at NYU, so he can't be here today. He wrote a poem called The Longing of the Long Poem. So the idea that long poems long, they are always longing, they sort of yearn. There's a kind of a stretching again that goes on that's of interest and has to do something with what's possible with the long poem. I mean, long poems seem to have their own physiologies and metabolisms if you think about them. I'm teaching a course right now called Modernist Epic, where my graduate seminar is reading all of the cantos and all of Zukowski's A and all of Patterson and all of Maximus by Charles Olson, so it's a lot of reading. So I've become very interested in things like exhaustion. Hey, Carla, there's the scroll. That's the scroll. I just talked about the scroll. Yeah. You're not,
I'm not on a roll, I'm just making
okay. So the idea of, the idea that poems can be exhaustive, or that they can be exhausting, I think is really interesting with long poems. You can get tired of them, and they can really wear you out, as they say. So other questions: what are the pressures and stresses on and of a long poem? How are they organized? How do you punctuate a long poem? I'm talking in terms of larger kinds of senses of punctuation. How do you structure them? How do you maintain the energy of a long poem? It's so interesting because so many long poems seem to flirt with failure, if not fail. If you think of the sort of spectacular failure of the cantos, where he basically talks about the problem that they don't cohere. How do you make them cohere? How do you find balances and symmetries? I think again of other failures of Wordsworth's Excursion. Truly one of the most excruciatingly boring poems ever written, I think, and part of it has to be with the giant scale of this thing. Or Browning's Sordello, Robert Southey's Vision of Judgment. Long poems seem to actually somehow thematize failure, if you think about it. In other words, There's the prelude, for instance, begins with Wordsworth unable to write a poem. It's a poem about finding the way to write poems again. So the long poem becomes an occasion, really, for working out in some kind of detail and at some kind of length this problem of failure. If you think of the great romantic odes, the Intimations Ode, another, the failure of the imagination. It would be hard to write a short poem that really kind of got this. I'm just trying to think of, again, what a long poem might actually invite or propose or suggest to a poet in that way. And then, of course, the whole idea, the most spectacular human failures of all, war and dying. The long poem has been associated with war since the Iliad. And then there's, in parenthesis, by David Jones, the World War I poem, The Song of Roland, H.D.'s War Trilogy. I mean, you've really got an interest in the long poem as tackling certain kinds of large-scale subjects that have to do with its length, almost entirely. Ezra Pound, when he was thinking of writing an imagist poem, or a vorticist poem, he decided that you could do that, but he says it's possible to write a long imagist or vorticist poem, but you can't have a vortex at every moment in the poem. So there's bound to be moments when the poem gets lazy, when the poem gets boring, when the poem fails. And part of the long poem has to do with the fact that one might want to continually try to keep up that tension, but it's extremely difficult. So the poem actually does court failure in a really interesting way. As I said, they can be super boring. I don't know if you've ever tried to read The Four Zoas by William Blake. Some people love The Four Zoas by William Blake. I found it, and again, it's just that you have a poem that is really going to break and crack and fold and warp. Long poems run out of steam. They run out of gas. In the middle of the Chinese cantos, you're just ready to kill somebody. I like that. I like, though, that they engage and they're aggressive. There's a kind of aggression to the long poem, as well, of course, as an ambition. But, of course, the long poem is capacious. It contains multitudes. Whitman, of course, the great long poem, 19th century American long poem poet. They're encyclopedic. And they have their own sets of unique formal armatures. So you have lists, and you have ledgers, and catalogs, and all these kinds of ways of construing information that you don't normally associate with poetry at all. The long poem invites a certain kind of penetration. It's permeable to the world, not only in terms of these kinds of formal registers, but of course to everything else in the world to some extent. So there's calendars, there's inventories. They map. We're going to hear about mapping, I think, from D. Morris, I'm thinking. No? Okay.
Probably not.
Okay. She's talking tomorrow.
Unless I bring the
She's a
one
mapper.
paper.
But anyway, if you think about maps, and you think about cartography, and you think about, which again requires a certain scale, or an anatomy, the idea that you're going to anatomize a particular subject. This is again something that the long poem does that these other kinds of poems do. They accommodate landscapes, distances, they can be panoramic, they can be kind of giant in those ways. Tintern Abbey is a great kind of, I guess it's more like a medium poem, but it's a longish poem that has to do with these ideas of foreground and background and distance. Because they deal with distances, long poems can use tone. They're very tonal. Tone is always a matter of some kind of, almost ethereal kind of sense of something that has to do with landscape. They can even have mountains in them. If you think of Mont Blanc by Shelley, which is just this craggy, awesome, long poem, how do you get a mountain into a poem? You're going to have some kind of length and so forth. Some long poems are really less about length. I've been thinking more about depth. So if you think of Ebner Bese Phillips' poem, Zong, if you know that poem, it is a long poem, but it's also about plumbing depths. It has deeps. And there's a bunch of poems, Maximus is another one, and Patterson, that have sounding charts in them, as if there was this third kind of dimension that the long poem makes possible, partly through its cartographic kinds of impulses, but also because you do have the sense of something large and deep going on. They're dialogic. You remember, Bakhtin doesn't like lyric poetry because it can't be dialogic. It's always just one person talking. Well, that's, of course, something that the long poem really has. They're heteroglyphic, they're polyglossic. Homer already do the police in different voices. if you know what I mean. They can feature long debates and arguments. That's another great thing that they can do. So you have all the scholastic owls and nightingales and medieval long poems, Yeats's dialogue of self and soul, or something like the Book of Job, which is just this ongoing kind of insane argument that the poetry really makes possible, again, really by virtue of its length. Journeys, travels, adventures, all of that kind of stuff. And of course, satire and parody. So if you think of Byron's long poems, there's these incredible kind of takedowns of the other romantics who we found so objectionable. Something like not so much Childe Harold, but Don Juan, where you have mock epics. They're a great way to, or The Rape of the Lock, something like that. They're a great vehicle for satire because they allow, satire takes time to build. It really takes a lot of time to kind of work out their space. And then, of course, the best thing they do maybe is they go cosmic. You know, you have Dante, you've got the visions of paradise, you have Prometheus Unbound, the machineries of myth get located in long poems, as opposed to poems that are going to be shorter or whatever. So you have Blake made possible, Milton, Ovid, and so forth. And finally, I think it goes without saying that especially contemporary long poems can be important in projects of nation building and of identitarian politics, in gender, race, and ethnic issues. These are also places that the long poem tends to come in and make a certain kind of contribution. So you could begin with, in America, in the American scene, you have Whitman, who's already this champion of the long poem. There's a way in which the American poetic scene is full of long poems, partly because the sense is that America is a place where you literally stretch out, where there is a certain kind of landscape that permits and insists upon a certain kind of length in the poem. So you've got Whitman, you've got Crane, Langston Hughes, his awesome poems using jazz and stuff to try to think through blackness. Myung-Mi Kim writes long poems, very small pieces, but they turn into long poems. Claudia Rankine very recently, and Navajo poet Sherwin Mitsui, who has a really awesome long poem. So the long poem also becomes a kind of a site for really thinking through these kinds of identitarian issues. But I think, generally speaking, the fact is that long poems are not short. They are long. If we just keep that in mind, then we got a lot more. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first reader. Craig Dworkin is really one of my oldest and dearest friends. We were graduate students together, and we started reading A and the Cantos, and gosh, all kinds of stuff. Way back in the 90s, right? Yeah. Yes, that's right. And, I still have all my little notes in A, because the Z site was not around yet.
The internet wasn't around.
Yeah, you're right. So you couldn't look anything up. And we just would sit in this bar called the Albatross and eat their free popcorn and drink beer and actually try to work out what was happening on the pages of A. It was really awesome, but very frustrating.
And we solved it.
Yeah. And Craig, in the meantime, has become one of the most important and I would say adventurous poet critics working in the United States today. He teaches at the English department at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, and he's the author of over a dozen works, some of which I would call poetry, the rest of which I would call adventures in conceptual prose or something. He's famous for being one of the primary conceptual poets and writers and theorists of the whole conceptual poetry world. I don't want to pigeonhole him like that because he does a lot of other things, but that's, I think, what a lot of people know of him. So a couple of his books, Strand from 2005, Roof Books, still in print, small press book that's still in print from 2005, Parse from Attilos, 2008, Alkali, very recently, 2015. And he also writes things like small packages of cigarettes that have cards in them. He does all kinds of these sort of interesting books, if you want to call them that. He's also the author of two really well-received critical books, Reading the Illegible from Northwestern of 2003, where he actually tries to think about how to read poems that you literally can't read because they're either printed over or they're smeared or the writer has made some kind of attempt to actually make it very difficult for you to see what's happening. In fact, I remember when Craig was writing that book, I would, because it was his dissertation, I would see him and he would complain about these incredible headaches he was having as he was trying to read these texts like Matt Mesh, right? Bernstein's poem. Yeah, where you have like 5 or 6 texts over typed. So he had to like peel every letter off and try to figure out what was finally being said there. So this is really excruciating sense of reading. And then his other book, 2013, is No Medium, where he deals with music that has no sound, and paintings that have no images, and poems that have no words, and things like that. It's a brilliant book. I highly recommend reading. He's also edited 6 collections of various sorts: Language to Cover a Page, The Early Writings of Vito Acconci from 2006, The Consequences of Innovation, 2008. He co-edited with Marjorie Perloff The Sound of Poetry, The Poetry of Sound, University of Chicago, 2009. And then the really big kind of, blockbuster anthology of conceptual writing called Against Expression, which he co-edited with Kenneth Goldsmith. It's really this insane compendium of some of the most, again, really adventurous and inventive kinds of writing. So he's really he also curates a website that I recommend you look into called Eclipse, which he has basically rescued all of these wonderful and again, really experimental works from oblivion and basically put them up on this website called Eclipse. So lots of books that you can't see anymore, you can't get them, and so forth and so on. He has 3 new books of poetry coming out, and he's editing a collection of art and philosophical documents pertaining to the idea of nothingness. When is that supposed to come out?
Next year, 2017.
Okay. So, let me introduce please welcome Craig.
Thank you.
Dworkin.
Really sweet. Thank you. Thank you to the center. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to read just a very small part of a sentence that is about a 30,000 word long sentence that theoretically, if you could hold everything in apposition, is grammatically correct. And it comes from Oulipo technique, definitional literature, and I begin with a sentence from Gottlob Frege on the introduction of a name for something simple. A definition is not possible. There is nothing for it but to lead the reader or hearer by means of hints to understand the words as is intended. And so I took each of those words and replaced it with its dictionary definition, then took each of the words in that next sentence and replaced them with their dictionary definition. And so this is from fairly early on in the 5th iteration out. That is to say, the taking of communion of molestation by the mutual relation of 2 bodies whose external surfaces touch each other and, at frequent or short intervals, often repeatedly, as deriving or deducing from a specified source their full, interesting, and productive existence. That is, a worthwhile, meaningful, or fulfilling lifestyle of an inflorescence in which the central axis grows indefinitely in length, producing a succession of lateral branches bearing flower buds, or of sessile flower buds, which open successively from the lowest upwards, typically liberal in giving, that is, generous, namely, bountiful, munificent, in other words, open-handed, also liberal in expenditure, prodigal, lavish, or a good deal, sum total to which anything mounts up or reaches in quantity, number, or the sum of the principal and interest due upon a loan on the part of the share of an estate given by the passing of law to an heir or other beneficiary, or to be distributed to an heir in the settlement of an estate, or the exact quantity of an amount of money or a group of several closely related and morphologically similar species formally, still occasionally for convenience, not distinguished from each other, belonging to an action of collecting money from a religious or charitable purpose, or to defray expenses, especially at a religious service or public meeting, of self-same fees payable to a chief who presides at a thing, or unites in one person or substance in any way compelling, cogent, convincing, skillicate. Clear, obvious or not full-fledged, sprouted in the ear after reaching maturity, or grown from germ of rudimentary condition of the characteristic tendency to change, specifically fickleness, that is to say, change of purpose or plans or a cipher for secret correspondence in moderate proportional mixture of elements of a compound, that is, the condition in which elements are combined in their due proportion, particularly the combination of supposed quantities, hot, cold, moist, or dry, in a certain proportion determining the nature of a plant or other body, namely the combination of the four cardinal humors of the body by the relative proportion of which the physical and mental constitution are held to be determined. The condition of the weather or the climate is resulting from different combinations of the qualities heat, cold, dryness, humidity, that is, the adjustment of the intervals and the scale and the tuning of instruments of fixed intonation as keyboard instruments so as to adapt them for the purpose of practical harmony consisting in slight variations of the pitch of the notes of the true or just intonation in order to make them available in different keys. Strictly speaking, a particular system of doing this, sometimes extended to any system of tuning, including that of just intonation, and namely a middle course or state between extremes of any kind that is or has been portrayed in an oeuvre, or vidalike, that is, the marking out of the precise form of anything, specifically form, mold, or stamp, thus impressed, in which the period of time mentioned in certain biblical passages, usually understood to be a year in an interior passage, now in Scotland especially, one leading from the street to a dwelling house, outhouse, or stables at the back, or to a common stair communicating with the different floors or flats of the building, also variously extended to include the common stair, the open lane or alley, or the court to which any entry leads to an outlying part of a village or a small country town, the end of an estate, or an outlying property, usually preceded by a descriptive name of a passage, generally made up of 2 or 4 phrases from a complete musical idea and regarded as a distinct unit. Id est. A set of digits and a long number marked off by commas or spaces to assist comprehension. Also, the set of repeating digits and a recurring decimal indicated by dots placed over the first and last digits of the set depends on that of the sumptuous, magnificent, munificent, stately, splendid, imposing, enclosed with clouds or darkness, the end, close, finish, termination, wind up, e.g., of a speech, or riding, of the central or far from central, sharp, horny nail with which the feet of birds and some beasts are armed, the lowest part of the leg beyond the ankle joint, of an effort to force a phlegm up out of the throat of an ancient kind of light cannon, or a man, woman, or child, or any of the characters in a play or story, in view of what has happened, principally, mainly, for the most part, or as a colloquialism of a low and unrefined characteristic of one proper to ordinary conversation as distinguished from formal or elevated language, or as each of the days in the year fixed for payment of rent, wages, and other dues, the beginning and the end of tenancy of marriage to one of inferior rank, that is to say, the disgrace or dishonor involved in such a misalliance, or one's own person's granting tenure of a feudal fee to another, the vassal, on condition of an annual payment of a certain sum of the performance of a certain service and no small many medical advance forewarnings, originally actions or warnings in advance, that is, advance notification of subsequent events now, usually strong feelings that something is about to happen, especially something unpleasant expressly, presentiments or forebodings of sudden sticking, jamming, or locking fast, specifically becoming unworkable as by reason of undue heat or friction of the nature of epilepsy that comprises not only the parents and children, but also consanguine and conjugal relatives living in proximity, or brought out and rendered visible, the latent image produced by actinic actions upon the sensitive surface in an office or function of the conductor of an orchestra or choir, running lengthwise in the sweet music of song, sometimes used with reference to the singing of birds, that is, the beauty of musical sounds, tunefulness, melodiousness, in latter use, often simply music, frequently with overtones of a series of single notes arranged in musically expressive or distinctive sequence, skillicate, tune, to wit, the tune around which a polyphonic composition is constructed, or which constitutes the predominant part of a piece, to which other parts serve as accompaniment, fuss, or outcry about something, particularly the very small or trifling sum, amount, or value of a thing of little worth or importance belonging to a, quote, way in which a text reads, end quote. In other words, quote, the letter of the text, end quote. By way of explanation, quote, the form in which a text is found in a particular copy, a lection, end quote, a vituperation, anger, reproach, reproof from the itinerancy, revolution, just group of harpists is going down upon one's knees, and a portable case for holding arrows, and sometimes also a bow, or a tremble or quaver in the voice in such a way as to make a fraudulent imitation of these or those, organized in later use, usually covert, opposition to an invading, occupying, or ruling power, that is, that organized body of individuals engaged in such opposition by way of explanation, specifically, usually with the and capital initial, in the Second World War, 1939, 1945. The underground movement formed in France in June 1940 with the object of resisting the authority of the German occupying forces and the Vichy government in order to send a message electronically, especially by telegraph, id est, to send a person, an electronic message, especially a telegram conveying, while bearing up the transmission of a nerve force along the nerve in a charged pan in which the cane or maple juice is heated as part of the process in sugar manufacture, or silicate, also said in the context of the units of pressure equivalent to 1 dime per square centimeter of the district under the jurisdiction of a collector of customs, taxes, etc., of wine cups made of, quote, the unquenchable stone, and, quote, specifically, a fabulous stone, the heat of which once kindled was alleged to be unquenchable, a distorted reference to the phenomenon observed by pouring cold water on quicklime, that is, an alleged kind of incombustible flax, by way of explanation, a mineral or fibrous texture capable of being woven into an incombustible fabric, specifically all fibrous varieties of hornblende or amphibole and of pyroxene, with amianthus merely being specific and finest hornblende, asbestos distinguished by its long, silky fibers, usually pearly white, etc. In a very amusing, funny, that is fun, exciting, that is to say, great, excellent steam made suddenly exciting, thrilling, or intense as if caused by electrical charge or shock, silicate, a mist rising from the ground of a steely, brilliant, or metallic color or shade, having comparatively more stocks or reserves of money, materials, people, or some other asset which can be drawn on when necessary pertaining to the art of literary construction, and returning less frequently to an assembly point or a resting place. That is to say, rarely retiring to one's friends or place, that is to say, trusting on abundance of some good constituent pertaining to or relating the words or vocabulary of a language that is connected with a lexicon accepted or recognized as true or valid, that is acknowledged as such by the general assent of the admission of the speaker, the writer, the faithful, loyal, or trusty person, particularly a, quote, true man, namely a member of the Protestant or Whig party in the 17th century, technically perfect or efficacious, entitled to obedience or acceptance, come to agreement on a matter or point, deposited under an agreement by which the owners assent to some proposed change affecting their amount, nature, or status, or, that is, a man, woman, or child who has become the object of knowledge, the civil force of the state responsible for maintaining public order and enforcing the law, including preventing and detecting crime, or, a person of appearance of questionable character belonging to one who gives evidence in relation to matters of fact under inquiry, that is, specifically, one who gives or is legally qualified to give evidence upon oath or affirmation in a court of justice or judicial inquiry, or a living creature killed and offered as a sacrifice to some deity of sinfulness or supernatural power of wrongdoing, extracted with a pick or by picking in various senses vis-a-vis, dug out, pecked out, or acknowledged, accepted, namely, known, identified, apprehensive expectations, especially from an assembling of a number of persons in a line, e.g., for inspection or identification. By way of explanation, an instance of bringing into a line, that is, a list of players in a game, orchestra, etc., from an assembly of 2 or more figures or objects performing a combination either of a complex design or distinct portion of a design of pictures made using a camera in which an image is focused on the sensitive material and then made visible and permanent by chemical treatment by the books of the New Testament, which immediately follow the Gospels and relate to the history of the early Christian church, having no person, thing, or space intervening in place, order, succession, standing, or coming nearest the next, or papers containing an account or observation, the results or research of an intellectual speculation or the like is presented to a learned society, submitted for publication in an academic journal, etc., of the aspects pertaining to or relating to, concerned or connected with, sight or vision of a system for reproducing an actual recorded scene at a distance on a screen by radio transmission, usually with appropriate sound, widely scattered, artificial imitations or representations of persons or the busts of persons in solid form, that is, statues, effigies, sculptural figures, often figures of saints or divinities as an object of religious veneration attaining to vision by distant objects by collective action or arrangement, or expressly the conveyance of passages through a medium as of light, heat, sound, etc., or the returning of documents or other physical evidence to the custody of the court of such things as reflect, such as mirrors, or, namely, also the badge, emblem, symbol, responding or, quote, answering accordingly to them, of or belonging to the labor, toil, and wasteful expenditure, extravagance, and in reality devolved or accrued through the whole continuance of unnecessary elaborate performance, in plain English, of fuss, commotion, drama is different from one's regular occupation or employment that serves to help, assist, or supplement, especially providing assistance or supplementary supplies and material, loads, burdens, weights placed or situated overhead at a distance above the ground, that is to say, the best or highest quality, first class, excellent number of pigs, each containing 6 stone, wanting 2 pound, or the 4th parts of the benda existing at the outset, or to wit, also decoratively affixed or attached to a group of moles in another's employ for, quote, the method of ascertaining a ship's course by trigonometrical diagrams, end quote, of what a batsman, an oarsman, etc. has to do, especially with reference to the points at which his force is to be applied, with then deviating course in the absence of the interference of state or government in the domestic affairs or foreign relations of another country belonging to one who contracts or undertakes to supply certain articles or to perform any work or service, especially for a government or other public body, at a certain price or rate, or one who is prepared to undertake work by contract by unhindered literates characterized by refined grace, a form usually the result of art or culture, no longer in servitude or subjection to a figure of speech in which a name or descriptive word or phrase is transferred to an object or action different from but analogous to that which is literally applicable, the use of symbols in a story picture, etc., to convey a hidden or ulterior meaning, typically a moral or political one, that is, a story picture, etc., which uses symbols to convey a hidden or ulterior meaning, typically a moral or political one, especially a symbolic representation expressly an extended or continued metaphor, no longer in servitude or subjection to the character or practice of acting in two different ways at two different times, or openly and secretly, specifically deceitfulness, double dealing, or the intentional suppression of truth or known fact to the injury and prejudice of another, or namely belonging to the Germanic nation or coalition of the nations that conquered Gaul in the 6th century, from which the country received the name of France, commonly fair, strictly speaking, neat, tidy, prominent, striking, pronounced, contributing each to the ranks or levels in a non-mathematical hierarchy in which every member, except those in the lowest ranks, the function of the members of the next lower rank, kept or regarded as inviolate from ordinary use and appropriated or set apart for religious use or observance on the fixed, firmly embraced, or implanted dowries or restraints in conduct, that is, modesties, discretions, specifically prudences, quote, methodological arrangements, dispositions, end quote, a lengthier work occupying a person for or at a particular time's propagations of perennial plants by splitting clumps into parts capable of rooting themselves into the more rudely, angrily, or sternly brief or curt arpeggio gland of a bird which secretes the oil used for preening, setting, placing in a specific state, situation, condition, etc., quote, the space of a specified period of time, end quote, or the measured flow of words or phrases in verse forming various patterns of sounds as determined by the relation of long and short or stressed and unstressed syllables in metrical foot or line, that is, an instance of this, or the secret, private, numbers marked upon dice, id-esque throws in which the dice turn up 2 sixes of shaking or movement of the ground, especially a violent convulsion of the Earth's surface, frequently causing great destruction resulting from movements of the Earth's crust or from volcanic action or the action of going off, with a loud noise under the influence of suddenly developed internal energy, also use of electrical discharges or of a boiler, bomb, gun, etc., the action of suddenly bursting or flying in pieces from a similar cause into hiding or surreptitious activity which continue to operate in secret and often subversively after becoming officially unacceptable is clearly perceived or perceptible from the extreme force, strength, depth, brightness, etc., the energy expended in such an action, now called work, at any one partial small residential square or side street, especially a cul-de-sac, lined with houses. In plain English, a short row of houses which originally stood by themselves or on a suburban road. By way of explanation, any group of houses not properly classifiable as a street was often extracted or forced out by mechanical pressure by a precise sum or aggregate of the collection of individual things or persons, that is, a discharge or performance of something pertaining to the logarithmic curve of the highest rates, resultant consequent bending of rays of light from the straight line by hook applied specifically to the apparent bending or turning aside of the rays passing near the edge of an opaque body, called by Newton inflection, now explained as a phenomenon of diffraction pertaining to or relating to a characteristic of, connected with, or produced by an earthquake, earthquakes, or earth vibration, balance, settled, or audited to loud, praise, commend, the condition of being at variance, vis-a-vis, discord, disagreement, dissension, that is, dispute, debate of a quantity of a substance or material spread over a nearly horizontal surface to a more or less uniform thickness, it has to layer or a coat, silicate, especially one or two or more parallel layers or coats successively superimposed one upon another, resting, reclining, remaining in deposit, being sick, etc., if the ground or bed under water of a lake, sea, or river lawfully made prisoner, hence gotten into one's powers, won by conquest without formality or ceremony, in a casual or relaxed manner to any connection formed between two or more people or groups based on social interaction and mutual goals, interests, or feelings, the dregs, the sediments, the liquors, the last portion of the wine of the cask of, quote, anything but not any person, and, quote, attentively looked at and truly reflected on as the portion on which it concentrates or dwells upon, becomes preoccupied with, or is given to the support of one's arm, as to a woman for leaning on or walking so as to walk arm in arm as a gesture of courtesy, or, that is, the fund or revenues appropriated to endow such an institution, illegitimate child, foot soldier, or the predominant affection of the familiar form of address, my dear, darling, strictly speaking, sweetheart, belonging to a little crown or coronet suggestive of a butterfly, in other words, showy, specifically frivolous, that is, capricious, to wit, erratically belonging to prevailing political, economic, or social order, especially regarded as oppressive expressly the establishment, that is, any impersonal, restrictive organization of regulating, moderating, restraining, or a group of bodies moving about one another in space under some particular dynamical law, is the law of gravitation, beholden to moderation, temperance, restraint, that is to say, abstemiousness for another sum of the principal and interest due upon a loan in which the central axis grows indefinitely in length, producing a succession of lateral branches bearing flower buds or sessile flower buds, which open successively from the lowest upwards. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and introduce Bob, and then we'll listen to Bob, and then we'll, have a conversation and so forth. So, all right. Well, Bob Perelman, I've also known for a long time. First time I met him, I think, was I asked him to come to a high school class I was teaching in Berkeley before I knew Craig actually, and we were reading. I was teaching sort of a contemporary poetry class, and we read Bob's book, First World, and he came into the class and talked about it to us. So that was probably in the early 80s or mid-80s, something like that. Bob has gone on to become not only the author of at least 12 books of poetry, as far as I can count, beginning in 1975, and then he's got things coming out, but also a distinguished professor at Penn, where he taught for many years, and now he's teaching at Princeton. He's retired from Penn recently, and he's teaching a class at Princeton. He is not just the author of many books of poetry. If you don't know his work, I would recommend perhaps his selected poems called 10 to 1. Came out from Wesleyan University Press, and it has a nice selection of all the books up to whenever that came out. He also has 2 books of critical prose, The Trouble with Genius, Reading Pound, Joyce, Stein, and Zukofsky. So really looking at these long poems, which came out on University of California Press in '94. And then The Marginalization of Poetry, Language Writing, and Literary History. And you might know Bob Perelman really from his affiliations with the language poets who got started in the 70s and through the 80s and 90s. And are still around, as far as that goes. There's one sitting right there, so they're around. He has 2 books coming out. I love this title, Modernism: The Morning After, on Alabama Press, and a new book of poems called Jack and Jill. And he's also was a regular contributor to the Grand Piano, which is a kind of collective history of the language poetry movement in the Bay Area. So there's 10 volumes of that, and each of the 10 participants in that, as that language, part of the language school, writes an essay in each. So there's 10 essays he's got written there, which are quite wonderful. So, here's Bob.
Thanks. Well, this is a real pleasure. Thank you, Michael. Thanks to all the people who helped put this together, and it's really great hearing Craig. What I'm going to read is something that's it's in a way the inverse of Craig's. It's a very intensive rather than extensive, but at the same time it's in a way you could say we're doing the same thing of trying to gesture toward connecting, making that impossible connection between word and thing. What this Before Water is a long poem I wrote as part of a performance that Francie Shaw and I did in, I think it was 1976 at what was then called 80 Langton Street, and Langton Arts in San Francisco. And Francie set up a camera at Jones Beach in San Francisco and filmed the ocean for about 20 minutes. And then had this film, had a projector there. And she had a roll of prepared butcher paper that unrolled as the film of the waves coming in was projected onto the butcher paper, and she would draw the waves. She was into gestural production of lines at the time. And then sometimes I would stop the projector and she would do a more careful filigree copying of the wave, etc. And I wrote this poem accompanying that art piece of hers, and it just really got me. It triggered this almost oceanic, so to speak, feelings in me, and it was the proposition was to write sentence after sentence as if they were waves in the ocean coming in. So each one was sort of saying the same thing, like, okay, here's the whole ocean and here's this particular wave, and it happens endlessly. And so I tried to somehow imitate the ocean and the production of waves. I used a rather restricted vocabulary, and I certainly reused the words a lot. So in that sense, it's a kind of polar opposite of Craig's outward extending gesture. But this is not systematic at all. It was just a question of trying to keep inventing, and occasionally I would you'll hear, I think, I'll let a few new words in, etc. Anyway, so it'll be about 20 minutes. Before water. The clear sentence the world ends, the clear sound the water made, once the noise vocabulary. The sentence is an obstacle to noise. Ponderous forethoughts enable the sound to read its own mind. Clever of the world to rise, crest, fall, white noise. Edit the end once again. Dries clear and won't give birth. Blue over once, one more noise. Hear it say itself to what I see. Water before the sound until the sentence fills. I made the noise of its mind. The world end, the sentence ends. On edge the water thought touching noise. Once again the sentence ends. One sense to a vocabulary. Line up in order of birth. Each time, of course, the sentence completes. I make the noise of vocabulary. After it was a sentence, it's a sound. Water roll sense make blue. Do one to the end. The clear blue birth of green. Touching itself, the sentence learns its loop. Learning will make the noise edge. The end makes birth once. Blue course, no noise in this sentence. No noise in this sentence. The sentence goes over itself. Gave a loop to clear dried water. Ponderous water, the end of noise. Leaning over each death edge complete. The world enables the water to end. Blue and noise at each edge of the sound. The sense against the water. The sentence ends when made. The noise rolls when the water's ready. While it's before, through to when I hear it. Vocabulary enables forethought to end. Roll over watery noise the sentence says to. The clear noise the sentence makes. Blue water at the sense's edge. This sentence learns to roll over. At the end of sense there is no death. Each time the end says itself. Noise makes sense at every edge. It's up to blue to say. The vocabulary learns to lean. Each vocabulary contains its own blue. The clearer the world, the nearer the edge. I make my sense to the end. Green water learns to dry. Each edge of the water. Every once it's over. To the edge, to the end, no noise of forethought occurs after the mind falls. To the end of noise, the mind occurs once, falls water. I touch the water's clever sense. I only think of this each time. The sentence starts to contain water and spills, touching the end with the edge of the loop. This water was once a sentence. White water touching blue water. Once I sense the end, it's a loop. Green appears where it says blue. Each sentence is complete. Each sentence is the same. The same sounds give birth to the same sentence nearer the end. I make the water dry. Each noise the water makes ends. Each sentence completes the world. Sound ties thought to itself. The thought of the death of thought gives mind its edge. Every sentence is water. The shape of water in each one is the same once it's over. Clear thought merely noise. The sentence made clever death noise. Blue makes sense once in the vocabulary. Watery noise over the water. The world makes sense once a sentence. Water is made of thought. The clear completed sentence, the world is blue. Sense leans nearer over sentence noise. Forethought comes to the edge and spills. This time it's water that's complete. A loop makes no noise at the completed edge. Water makes blue make white. I made each time line up in order. Extending the thought enables birth to end. I read my own blue. A loop around was or will be. I hear noise make sense near the end. The end of the noise, the edge of the sentence. Each ponderous birth of vocabulary rolls in. Do it once. Does this noise completely end the world? The senses fall to white noise loops. The sentence is a line of water in order to read my mind through once. The sentence in a noise of falling order, green extent. Once it's done, the world dries. I made death green only to think. The world is made of sentences. Once again, the noise ends with time made blue. White time lines the sense with noise. There was no vocabulary in the water. Every once the time rolls in vocabulary. Once I edit sense, I end. This sentence gives the vocabulary I sense birth. Noise against blue death, no noise. The water rises in the middle to end the sentence. I learned to read before I heard a sound. Each noise makes the same sound. This sound ends this loop. See it say water. No noise enables sense to end the world. The noise of it, water of it. No time until the end rises white. The sentence makes dry sound. The clear blue sea is just noise. The edge contains the noise of the edge. Water is made of noise. Once each loop, the noise turns clear. I made a sound, it made a noise. It goes and went dry. Each sentence completes the thought that tells it where to start. I start the sea. Once a sound occurs, it's over. The water is lined with dry noise. I is a sound that occurs again and again to the same water. Green once again. Before I end thought, I end. The sentence makes itself. Forethought touches water before water extends the sense. What's the sense of thinking every thought? I say to see the water. Vocabulary lines up each time. I never think I'm the same as thought. Time is lined up noise. Blue of lined green makes sense. Blue is complete sense. The noise of thought occurs to make thought ponderous. Noise is the same difference as water and thought. Every sense each time. Water says to thought, water. Loop the time against death. The middle of the sentence never ends. The middle of the same noise makes a different sense. The world on edge rolls its own water. I'm here to make noise make sense. I will only sense completed time once. Think and the sense is made. Each one in every sense. I am made of one birth, the end and the edge of the water. Blue makes it sound blue. Once it's a sentence, it's never the same. The shape of the sentence is clear beyond the water. It is the end of itself. Water read my mind before my birth. Roll the sentence over the edge. A sentence says the world and ties the water to green, blue, and white noise. This loop over this loop. Toward the water while in the sentence. The clear sound, the clear water. Green for mind, water for noise. Where to leave the water's edge? See the same thing, make the sound go away. Blue lines in. Noise makes me think. See the water over again. Once thought ends, green starts. Water to the edge of each sentence. The world learns to end. Blue, lean, green sound. There is no water there. White says itself. Do I learn sound? See against sentences. The mind okays the noise, the water pushes the mind away. Sentences are shape, the world is end. I, same I, think water, I, water. Thought extends throughout the sentence. Blue start up edge over makes this sound and noise away. A full sentence complete with water. I go from my birth to water to sound. I learn the complete water. Blue each time or green every same time. I'm the same water as I think. A sound vocabulary contains spills. Water in blue noise. Nowhere in the sentence is there a separate noise for water. Is it or isn't it what it says? The same thought, the same time as the same thing. Sentence says so sound may go. Loose blue water or I thought it. I'm a shape, I shape. There is more thought than time, more water than vocabulary. Thought is clear and clearly not water. Each edge marks where two senses end. No time before this thought to think it. Through sound into the blue water over sound. The noise of the time before. By the middle of the sound, the sentence was here. Water in the same sense as a broken line of noise never ends. The world ends what I think extends beyond the sentence. Only one time and go. I hear the end once noise completely falls away. Blue starts with no time. Water falls, learning to be noise. Born blue on the only edge. Never once or here again. The shape of the sound is the same as mind touching water. Noise touching the sentence to point it to water. The end is one edge. Now the world starts completely over. See blue, say noise. I dry to clear sound. The thought, the noise makes clear. Mind or water in order. The sentence ties a line around the water's complete shape. Water is open. Once death, it's blue. No, because of noise. False sense, clever extension, and never again water's made. My mind's made up. I hear water spill beyond its sound. One sentence makes the world. In here, it's there out here. One and think again to say it. Send the sound at the end of the line. More time each time. I shape the loop with vocabulary that enables the noise to crest. The white line never stays white. Think one of the sounds. Each is the same as the edge and disappears. I say blue, I see blue. Sound on edge makes the sentence see itself. I hear the sound while it's over. Nowhere until it appears. A noise says to hear. Blue, and again it's water. Looped noise vocabulary more than noise can learn to see. I hear, I say, inside sound. Touch before and water after. It's the end that makes birth violent. Thought as sound of itself. This sentence says itself once. The noise learns to be water in time to roll white words into the sentence. Water makes noise and sound made water appear. Vocabulary was always its only edge. The sentence stands in the middle of the water. The color of the water, the sound of the sentence. Each shape starts all over itself. Blue nowhere outside of noise. Green at the same time it's said. I touch each sentence to the thought of what I hear. The blue line means water, the noise means blue. This sentence is full up. Death gives blue noise out there. The water starts to rise. A sound of it. Blue. Ponderous, completely filled in thought ends before. Wrinkled water behaves itself. The edge includes what it leaves out. Each crest comes to the same thing. I read green as sound. The sound of water ends at once. Once I'm here, I see lines. Noises think the same thing. Mind thought the noise mind. Even where it happens, it ends. Once in and gone. The water extends blue across the looped noise. Sound clear, through thought of water. Inside sounds, the outside stands clear. I see uncovered blue as a noise of a line, a sentence across the end of all it can think. One sentence to the edge of green without more green. Sense is a loop of sense once it's thought. And spills dry to hear or noise. Another white and the same white. The edge rolls itself away. A different sentence goes across the sentence. The water completes the sound. It's gone between the sound and where it is. The noise clear through to itself. The completed spill. Time goes as ready sense. In a falling crest I say the middle of the water. More than I can think in ready noise. Once and only again not. Ready to time the water's edge. Sound leaves out things to sense. The world in the same sense as this sentence. Against itself, water disappears. Every end made over. The noise, death, birth makes no noise to end water. White loops, ready the same as each separate noise. Went in, all once tied around. Loops each noise against the mind I see in. Complete thought includes a separate vocabulary for each sound. All the water spilled in one sentence. No more noise, no more than noise with an edge. A completed sentence draws a line around noise at the end. A separate spill for each thing learned. See or think, clear, dry blue. Edge so clear once the middle's water. Touched no other than the same thing. Gone before again. Water coming in once I shape what it says. The same things complete a different world. Green and blue or see into it. Time a variation of one. Time before the end of the sentence to say. Each noise enables itself to go away. It's over to have a shape. Thought against vocabulary against sense through to the end. I learned to end before forethought touched me here. World against itself is water. The sentence goes to here. A clear sound invites thought. I can only hear the same sound once. Once started, all shape can do is loop its edge without end. A green thought against the completed world. All sentences start from here. Sound all over and clear to hear. To clear vocabulary from what I see. The point of sound is beyond thought and loops back in completely. Extend vocabulary to start before complete water. I is a noise it can think. The world disappears as the edge never ends. I make the sound to learn the end. The sea is nearly never ready to contain water. As the thing sounds, I read the same thought. I think this through, or the water stays. Each complete sentence says time will end. I see it as it falls away. Noisy water again. One is a loop. A complete sentence invites the world to be outside. No sound inside shape. I read my mind. Water said to be water once. I extend the line between water and its shape. Thought has no choice between water and thought. I'm sorry, did I say that? Thought has no choice between water and thought. The world occurs against what the sense of it enables the sentence to say. I fall is the edge. A sentence is here and over. No blue, no green, no water, itself complete. A separated noise clears the way to blue. A sentence threw all the water away. See it through it. Clever noise across the clear world. Once a noise is a thought, it's all I hear. It took here to think more sound. See blue where blue was. Think once in and edge. Tied itself across what was said. Goes dry, extends to water. I think a sentence while it starts. Blue water makes a noise in green water. Inside the uncovered sounds. Leave the water at birth. Edge to sense noise around itself. I see it until it's water. Once in a line in order, ponderous noise nowhere before. I can't think again. Tell the water where to start. To make sense, the middle disappears. One separate from itself, nowhere but here. I see around the sound. Sense makes noise ready to make sense. The thought was uncovered by the end of the sentence. I'll hear this noise end. Sound in the same sense as birth makes noise. In it to say again one. The sentence goes back to where it came from. Green through itself. The noise varied itself to make me hear the same thing it said. Time once established goes away. Such shape as the sentence takes away from the world. Touch sends to water. The end is over against each sentence. The water rolls as before water. Once it happens to sound outside all time. The water sounds okay. The noise crosses the sentence. I'm ready to see. It's water again.
Okay, this part, we're just I'll raise a couple questions and issues, and maybe we can see if we can actually have a conversation of some sort. And then we'll open it up to the floor. If anybody would like to actually just jump in or, participate, just let me know, and we can go ahead. Hi, Peter. Nice to see you. That's Peter Middleton, who I was quoting earlier about the longing of the long. Okay, so, a couple things struck me. First of all, I found at times when I was listening to this, I found listening to both poems very excruciating. And there was a way in which I think they both provoked a certain kind of, at least for me, moments when I lost tension. Yeah, I know, great.
Right?
Yeah. So I'm wondering, and then both of you are talking in many ways about the differences between noise, or at least this is implied in what you're doing, Craig, because there's a lot of noise in that. Bob's poem, of course, thematizes noise versus vocabulary. And I'm wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about, first of all, the relationships, like whether you're setting out to make a kind of a piece of writing that challenges the attention of a reader or a listener. And then how either one of you or both think about noise and vocabulary, because they both have to do with noise and vocabulary. Yours, the vocabulary is spinning out of itself in an interesting way. While Bob, it seems to me, it's almost a phenomenological kind of project where you're basically just responding with words to the sounds of water, as I understand. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about noise and noise and vocabulary, and then maybe a little bit about sort of the drifting in and out of attention, I think, that both of these pieces invite. I could be wrong. Other people might not have ever drifted out of attention. But I certainly found myself drifting out of attention. And I trust myself enough as a listener and reader to think that that there must be something that is part of the program in some kind of way.
I want to say something about Bob's poem, and is that because it struck me that it is one of it's like a classical site for the kind of drifting of attention is to listen to the water lap or to watch the waves. I mean, so that kind of provocation of a different kind of mental state from what is just repetitive and boring. What I liked about the vocabulary there is that the kind of bodies of water that come out of sound and like a synonym for kind of bay that meets the ocean, or the pond in ponderous. It starts bringing your vocabulary back into itself that you'd only recognize in the kind of meditative state produced by that rhythm.
It's funny, by the way. I mean, I've never actually written anything else, I would say, remotely like this poem. And I've written other long poems that are more dramatic, that play with narrative and collage and hark back and forth and tie things together back and forth. So this one, I mean, I really was trying to say the same thing each time.
Yeah.
And I have to confess, this is the author speaking here, that I wanted each line to be really interesting. But it is the problem of the repetition, the endlessness of trying to do the same thing each time. I mean, it was, for me, it was actually, I wasn't, at the ocean. I wasn't watching the movie of the. I remember just sort of sitting there, just trying to come up with a new one each time, and I would get on a roll and, write one every couple of seconds, and then I was haunted by, not haunted, a little troubled by, like, wait, did I say that already? And sort of when I got, and I knew it had to be about 20 minutes, so I knew approximately, I don't think I could do this for 100 pages. And I can't remember now if I went back and looked, sort of cheating. Did I actually, is this exactly the same sentence that I wrote? I think not. And the way, who cares, of course, it would be even better, because it's always playing with how close you can get to repetition and sameness, but you can never get there. And so, even, of course, the same sentence, 200 lines apart, but completely different, I think. So, one other thing I wanted to say, just in addressing Michael's attention issues. I mean, it's really hard. The question of the reader in the long poem, in this case, the listener in the long poem. I mean, that's a whole other kettle of fish. And you, Craig, you were reading at not Tom Rayworth speed, but top speed. I mean, you were really, so that does a whole special thing to our ears and our attention. And it's like, okay, we're going to sprint now. We're going to sprint around the track, for 10 miles. And I think, it is, people can get tired. Just the ear can get tired, whereas not necessarily the mind or the reading mind. And I can, when you actually read the poem, I mean, it's very delightful and weird, the constant novelty of and weirdness. Are there pigs in there, right, at some point, and then right next to Beloved and Honey, and I mean, all these completely odd, interesting juxtapositions. And I think a reader, I can imagine reading it, not hearing it, reading it really slowly, and I think it would be very hard to tell what were the interesting parts and what were the boring parts. So, here, reading this, I mean, I think it's pretty hard to read yourself into a meditative state. I think it's much easier to hear yourself into a meditative state. But reading, I mean, at least for me, certainly, my reading eye is always very judgmental and comparative. And, I can say, well, that one, I like this one better than that one. And, oh yeah, this one is sort of pretty much like that one. So I'm sort of judging how inventive each one is. So those are just complexities to the reception and thinking about what a long poem is. Anyway, I just wanted to try to not separate out, but just separate out the writing and reading from the listening experience.
Yeah. Well, can you say anything about the noise that you're... So one of your lines was, the sentence is an obstacle to noise. And Craig, it seems to me, there's a certain kind of overt cultivation of a certain kind of noise, the noise of the encyclopedia or the noise of the dictionary, all of that stuff that... It struck me, too, that both of you are really dealing with a kind of poetics of equivalence. I mean, you're really talking about repetition of this kind of thing, so each sentence seems to equal the other. Whereas Craig's whole thing is about words equaling other words and equaling other kinds of...
But with the comedy of the tremendous differences.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, there's it's like the equal sign, there's like, comedy and pratfall.
Yeah.
Between that equal sign is enabling that kind of pratfall.
Yeah.
So, I was thinking, I mean, I didn't know this when I wrote it, but I occasionally get around in linguistics and brain stuff, or just not knowledge, but weird kind of nerdy amusement, I suppose. And I found out some years ago, I think it's true, that our brain circuits there's a completely different circuit for processing language that we know, as opposed to the air conditioner or any traffic noise that comes in goes to a different part of the brain than vocabulary does. And I could say that I was intuiting that here. So, and I suppose I was thinking of the crashing of the waves somehow, even though Jones Beach is a very placid Pacific Ocean after all. You have to really exaggerate to imagine crashing. But anyway, this is not a mimetic poem. It's philosophic, I suppose. But anyway, no, I guess I was trying to get to, what would it be like to step outside of understanding words and just hear them as noise. And you can't do it. You can if you're, sleepy, but you can't listen to the noise of a language you know. Yeah. So I was poking at that boundary somehow.
I think one place that noise comes in here is that, and this is that the clinanomatic swerve is, as I'm, otherwise, theoretically, it should be equivalent, it should just be a sentence.
Right.
But it's, as I'm looking at the dictionary and I'm getting the homophone, I'm getting the homonym, or the meaning that's really not correct. And then since it's cumulative, that little bit of grit or noise amplifies out.
Yeah.
Then
Noise in a
into
different
the next
sense,
sentence.
in a sense of like signal and noise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I noticed another thing, and that is that both of the pieces were intensely rhythmic after a while. I think that has something to do with the sense of the lulling of the attention, or the stimulating of a different kind of attention. But Bob, you talked about the oceanic feeling and so forth. And so there was, I'm fascinated because it seems to me that for both of you, the rhythmic or the prosodic is basically sentence-based. It's based on the sentence and the sentential unit, if you know what I mean. So yours,
phrases incredible.
Oh yeah,
he said it was a sentence.
yeah.
But I don't know if I could diagram.
Well, you use phrases too.
I do.
But
yeah.
I guess
But
what I'm
it was
trying
more
to say
sentential,
is
yes.
that the music of both of these pieces seem to be really based on the prosody of the English sentence in that way, as opposed, say, to a collage theme or something like that. So I just wanted to point out, I don't know if you've thought about the prosody of this thing at all, or these things.
Well, going back to the lineage of the long poem, the epic, they all were prosody-based, rhythmically generated, up until the modernists, I guess.
Yes.
When you get to Williams, even more than Pound is the first, I think. That's the first. Patterson is, I think, the first collage long poem. Much more so than Pound. Williams really foregrounds. There's the weather report.
Yeah.
Things are really broken on the page. Whereas Pound, it is that what he called the gorgeous epic, and lots of little rhythmic impetuses. But one thing I was thinking about the longer history of the long poem. I think both of these art poems are, in a way, different from that history. In that, I think that they're both saying the same thing. They're saying one thing. Yours in a unbelievably elaborate extending of what one thing can mean, and mine in this intensive attempt to restate the one thing. Whereas long poems, going back in history, are they are encyclopedic. They are they try to have everything in them. I was just thinking, I said in the notes about like the Iliad has it has sports, it has family life, it has political argument, it certainly has lots of battle, it has the gods. It tries to sort of cover all the bases.
Well, Cribs did that a little too. I mean, there was just an incredible number of discursive registers pop up. You've got science and biology, and you've got politics and sociology.
Right, but it's glints
Yeah.
of these larger things. And in a way, okay, you could say that it would be lots of an endless number of little sort of shattered mirror pieces that mirror different ways and do mirror this totality. Maybe that would be.
Well, there's a great David Bowie quote about how the first time I looked at the Oxford English Dictionary, I thought it was a really long poem about everything. Which I think, I mean, why don't we think of the dictionary as an epic?
Yeah.
Because it's really long. It has all the good stuff, but it's
It doesn't
escaping that
it doesn't
ambition.
have all the registers.
Yeah.
It doesn't have all the social registers. There's no comedy. There's no. I mean, there are funny things. You can get little funny things, but there's no. It's not like suddenly an episode of The Honeymooners appears under
H.
Under H. Right. I mean, there's just whole ranges of human activity and behavior that argument.
What about length? Can we talk about length for just a second? Because they're obviously
Just a little.
yeah, just a little bit. But so how did you decide to stop? Let's put it that way, because ostensibly this thing could go on forever.
Yeah, well, so the next sentence would have
Oh,
been
okay.
something like
Gigantic.
120,000 word long sentence, and even I have better things to do.
So,
After a
so
while.
it really is exhaustion in some way. You've exhausted the kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and that's, just.
And it's also tact. I mean, you're being, somewhat friendly to read. You don't want to give them a 6,000 page book. You want to give them a 150 page. Isn't that how much
It's about 70,000
pages? That's
126.
Yeah, it's a short novel.
yeah. See, so that's tactful.
It's
That's
appropriate.
tactful.
It's appropriate.
Yeah.
But then exhaustion, just to go back and tie together your earlier question, is that, I think in the noise, in terms of the kind of swerve that I get,
Yeah.
often comes from me as a writer becoming fatigued. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm looking up words and writing down the definitions and looking something up. I've got other things to do, I get impatient or hungry, and that's when those errors tend to come.
Yeah.
So I think those are actually.
So you didn't rewrite. I mean, there's like an error when you mistranscribe.
That stays in the thirds.
And what about you, Bob? Did you just have a 20-minute?
Well, there was Francie's movie,
Oh,
and so I can't remember exactly how we did it. This was a long time ago. But hers was first, and I was addressing the movie, so I sort of knew how long it was going to be. But there was real fatigue. I mean, like I say, I was kind of trying to remember all the different permutations of those sentences and to not just repeat. Although, in hindsight, I certainly could have repeated. I could have relaxed.
well, should we open it up to audience?
The question I had was,
Yeah.
listening to them was one thing, but I wondered how you thought about these books on the page versus listening.
This is, I think, a version of your question about whether anyone would actually pay attention to something like this for very long. Part of what I like about it,
Well, would pay attention, but
could pay attention.
Yeah.
I mean, I think part of what I like is that this suggests a kind of reading that is, where it takes as its source the most instrumental kind of reading we
Yeah.
usually do. I want to know what a word means, or I want to know the history of this word. You look in the dictionary, then you're done. And here, there's no, you're not reading for something.
right.
You're not going to learn anything.
That's good.
So,
So I shouldn't think of that. I mean, I've read Bob's piece, I haven't read yours.
yeah, but I think they work differently on the page. But I think
Well, yours is,
that
yours is
not-
a, is a block of
That,
prose.
Yeah.
that block, I think, is significant. Yeah. It's there.
No, you know, mine, it's much shorter. It's a medium length poem, you might say. And it's in lines, and you know, if you squint enough, it doesn't look too much different from, you know, the Iliad, book one. You know, not 24 books. No, there's something weird about the long poem. Obviously, really weird. It's a human monstrosity. I've been poking around. I'm actually quite addicted to thinking about them. It's seeping into the new book. I'm quite interested in the Iliad and how odd and weird it is. And it turns out it was quite sui generis. There were no long poems, or they're not that long. I mean, there's kind of a gigantism that apparently swept over Dark Ages Greece in the 8th century. They found huge pots, you know, much too big for useful human use. You know, it's like, oh God, it's like 8-year-olds saying, oh, you know, let's just make a huge fort. Use all the pillows in the house, or, you know, buy many more couches and make, you know, it even bigger. And it was too big to hear, too big to, you know, it's really cumbersome. And Peter Middleton's, you know, The Longing of a Long Poem, you know, it's very eloquent in how impossible long poems are. You can't write them, you can't publish them, you can't publish them in magazines, you can't really teach them, even though you try. You know, you guys don't really do justice to the Chinese canons, or the Adams, Jefferson canons, I predict. You know, you probably don't.
We try.
Yeah. Anyway, so there's something interestingly inhuman about it.
Yeah.
You know, that we don't have those kinds of attention spans. Nobody goes to the movies that are, you know, the 20-hour movies. I mean, it's really hard.
Yeah. So, Yuri, do you want?
I'm glad you brought up Patterson because it struck me that Before Water really relates strongly to the third book of Patterson, the second part, the library.
Oh yeah.
Again, fire is the first thing. I think that's how it
Yeah,
started.
that's-
Fire burns. That's the first thing.
Poet beats fire at own game.
Yeah,
Remember
well,
that?
and it really arrives at the same kind of contemplation about the nature of the fire and the language and the thought and the.
That's
history
right. I hadn't.
and of course, well, there's the water, the Patterson thing. I'm just wondering if you were conscious of that. Is that a text that is?
Well, I'm a great Williams fan, and I like Patterson, and I block out his thematics of the 4 seasons and, you know, all that stuff, and I think it's really quite interesting if you do that. But I wasn't thinking of it. I mean, I really was just, I got bitten by this bug of like, you know, how can you, here you have, you know, this ocean, and then you've got this particular wave, and how do you imitate the sameness, but the endless recurrence and variety of that? So no, I would never have written this without Francie's project, and I've never written anything like it elsewhere. So there's no literary allusions. I think maybe at one point I came near to. I do think the thought crossed my mind about a green thought in a green shade by Herbert, and I did not want any literary illusions. I mean, that would be sort of the equivalent of like having a book floating out in the ocean. I just didn't ruin the book, ruin the ocean, both.
I can think of literary book titles that follow and echo this, like Complete Thought or Sound as Thought.
Yeah.
Both lines from your poem get taken as titles later.
All right, wait, not complete. Complete thought. No, actually, that's Barry.
Yeah.
That's Barry. Yeah. I don't know if he was. Who knows? I don't know.
Yes.
Thank you for the reading. And Bob said that probably you wrote about the same, you tried the same thing, you wrote about the same thing. For me, the reading experience was entirely different, very polarly different. And
You mean the two poems were very different?
the poems, but also the poems and the reading of the poems.
Oh, I
And-
see. Uh-huh.
And one of the things that really struck me, that in your poem, Bob, it was very clear to me that the reading instructions are encoded in the poem. So I felt, speaking about rhythm, that though I didn't see it and I've never read it, I felt that the lineation and the syntax would give me an instruction how to read it. And when I heard Craig, I felt that there was something very, very bodily, which was very different. That was one thing. It was very bodily, and I felt that the bodily mode, the tension between the abstraction of the vocabulary and the fields, and the bodily tension, this is one of the things that kept my attention. And I was curious about, speaking about the rhythm, I was very curious about the pauses, because on one hand, there was a sense that there was no pause. It flew, it was very mechanic, it was very overdetermined. At the same time, there were pauses like or syntax, or for instance, leaps in vocabulary that caused certain pauses. And I wondered whether those pauses was something that you discovered while you were writing it, or each time you perform it, you discover it. Is it different? When I will read it, will I discover it? What is the lore about the relationship between the pauses and the mechanism of going on?
You know, I think three quick answers. One of them goes back to what Mike said at the beginning about how you punctuate the poem. And the one editorial decision I needed to make was how to handle embedded, since I was trying to imagine that this could be this monstrously distended but grammatically correct 30,000 word sentence. That I ran into trouble with the embedded punctuation within dictionary definitions, as they separate like but not quite equivalent. So when semicolons and colons come in, and so the only words that I added were the words like id est and
Oh, you
silicate.
added all those. And you varied them.
Yeah, so those take the place of semicolons in dictionary definitions, basically.
Even that is to say,
Mhm.
that's you.
Yeah, or that's the punctuation.
Oh,
That's the punctuation of the dictionary. So I think that's one answer. I think the other answer is that some of the pauses are bodily, they're just my physical limits. And if I didn't have this awful virus today, that we would have had fewer pauses. But then maybe for me the more interesting one is, and this goes back to inattention and error. That I think of this as in some ways as a score of, or a record of my original performance of trying to do this, trying to look up all the words, trying not to make mistakes, trying to come to the end of this enormously long sentence. So this as a physical performance from the beginning, I think is the difference between my doing this by hand and writing a Perl script or something.
And another question, Uri talked about Williams and Patterson as a possible influence or lineation. I wondered, for example, if I can think about family resemblance, about Bob, how about Stevens and taking it to another place, to a completely different place, but there is at the background something, and with Craig I thought about Beckett.
Well, there's a little bit of lucky. No, it's lucky. Think, Dave. Is that Lucky?
Posa?
Pozzo? No, but the servant.
yes.
Think big. And Lucky, but it was the speed. You could, Stevens in jams, and this is unenjammed, I'm just saying that, although you could say this is a kind of a
No, it's different.
version of the snowman, that the water is not okay. But it's just struck me that this would work equally well read in kind of andante or adagio at the ground or bed under the water of a lake, sea, or river, lawfully made prisoner, hence gotten into one's power, won by conquest without formality or ceremony, in a casual or relaxed manner, into any connection formed between two or more people or groups based on social interactions and mutual goals, interests, or feelings, as the dregs sediment of liquors, the last portion of the, you could read it like that.
We'd have been here a lot longer.
But it's very interesting like that. I mean, it gets more novelistic, except it's stroboscopic, and you never. It's like the camera is just whirling around, but that it's social life so shows up much more like that. So.
Is there a question? Yeah, Dustin.
Bob mentioned enjambment, and it seems like in different ways, both of these long poems undermine the possibility of enjambment. One by making the line necessarily the complete beauty of meaning. The other by rendering the line insignificant as one of the things that seems like the long poem raises is a question about the relationship, among lines and between the long and the plural. Is it significant that enjambment doesn't factor into these longish?
Could people understand? Yeah, people heard.
Well, Milton in jams. That's like a big long poem. That's all he does. He jams and jams and jams. So it can be done, but not here. I mean, but you know what though, Craig? I say you could by misusing language, but there's something about. You could say that these phrases are enjammed in a way, because you do sort of slip in one sentence into another, only separated by a comma. That's not enjambment isn't the right word, but it's something changes. There's continuity of the prose, but something has really changed, and that happens constantly. It's not enjambment. I don't know what you call
A
it.
sudden sticking, jamming, or locking fast.
It could be that phrasal thing, it's the end of a phrase, it's the beginning of some kind of linking, like that is to say, or is all over this thing. That seems to be the real kind of gear to this kind of continual spinning out. So it probably has something to do with that. I hear you, Bob, though, that it almost sounds like it's lineated.
It's syntactically continuous and semantically disjunctive.
Yeah, that's right.
I ran into a phrase a couple of days ago by Norbesi Phillips. She's talking about the long poem, and what it does is create a space for fugal amnesia, which I think is a brilliant way of thinking of these two poems. At least for me, it is, that is to say, or it's like a reset button. You feel like, okay, I'll drop all that other stuff I've piled up into it. Okay, or here's my next chance.
Specifically?
Yeah. And Bob, your lines, I don't know if did you have 5 beats in each of them? It felt like it. It felt like they were kind of equivalent in terms of time.
No, I don't. No. There's short ones and long ones, but maybe there's some 5s.
Maybe it was the rhythm that you were reading it in. But again, there's a reset button, which happens with the next line.
Right. There's really no enjambment. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah. And so you get permission to forget. what came before, which I think is really interesting in terms of the long poem, as Ong, for example, talks about it as a memorization.
Yeah, it was like a whole cultural memory.
Yeah,
And
like an archive.
And people really did remember this stuff. I mean, suddenly there's some anecdote, I have half of it in my brain, where Augustus, so this is, 800 years after the creation of the Iliad, is really sadly pissed at his daughter who's screwing around. And he quotes some medium line from, the middle of book 16 of like, marriage should be respected, but like everybody knew this, and it was like a sort of a witty way to express his angst and disapproval. But everybody knew it. It would be like saying 7 years ago. So people really knew this stuff. And you're right. This is a kind of a presentist writing. Both of these are presentist.
Yeah.
Chris, yeah?
Yeah, I had a question and a comment about that's great. The question relates to the speed issue in performance. Was there any difference in the pace based on how far out the definitions were?
No,
Okay.
not intentionally.
Okay. Because the other thing was when Bob was mentioning Rayworthian speed, I think this is actually faster than Tom Rayworth. Than when the way
This is a British poet, Tom Rayworth, just so for people.
And what I always thought about Rayworth's work is that in performance it's always a virtuoso event, right? But when you actually read it on the page, you realize that one of the advantages of the virtuoso pacing is that it papers over things that are pretty dull. So that there'll be dull passages and you won't notice it. You'll just be wowed by the overall speed. Then I was immediately flashed back to this conference that Mike Golston and I were at in Germany a week or so ago, and there was a presentation on David Foster Wallace's novel about boredom, essentially, which is about these tax auditors, the guys working for the IRS, and they just had these lengthy detailed passages that they were projected up on a screen, right? We're reading them, and I just was realizing that I would skim that, right, in a novel, and so that there wouldn't be actually enforced boredom. Except, then I realized the only exception to that would be audiobook, right? If you were driving cross country and you had the audiobook of these excruciating passages, which normally you would skim through, like the whaling section of Moby Dick or something, you're not going to read that word for word generally. So I'm wondering here, because this was an extraordinarily paced, fascinatingly varied, but generally, super rapid pace, which I think allowed it to be less, in Mike's term, excruciating, right? That it wasn't, that was able to paper over stuff that if I was reading on the page, I probably would have a different, more glancing, distant reading.
Yeah, I think it brings up actually three or four of these questions about the look on the page and about enjambment and about boredom, but also what Bob was saying about I don't expect someone to sit down and read this 100-page sentence in the way you might sit down and read the first sentence in Moby Dick or something like that.
Call me Ishmael. It's nice and short.
Yeah. The first thing about a long poem, like I said, it's not short.
Call me. It's not a better edition.
But one of the things the speed does is try to bring out structure, which is what's there instead of enjambment is this syntactic structure.
Which is why I wondered whether you were pacing it differently based on how many concentric circles out you were in the.
But I think there are pleasures. I mean, there are real boring parts to this. I mean, it's just the dictionary. I can't take blame or credit. But there are also really good parts. I'd want to slow down.
We got some more hands up in the very back.
Thanks. I
actually it's in the same context. I was wondering, when we say the long poem, I think that we in a way assume that it's linear, chronological. It has a beginning and an end. And at least in the case of conceptual long poems, I think that part of the joy is that meaning is created randomly. There is a random creation of meaning, and that's the joy. We hear one definition and it merges into another definition. Also in the case of Kenneth Goldsmith, even more perhaps. He takes an entire issue of the New York Times or the forecast, and it's suddenly becomes poetic in some cases. And also another example is Eran Hadass in the Hebrew case, which takes the book of Genesis and dissects it into many haiku, short haiku poems. The name of the work is Code. It's written in code. And then, so it's the random, the random joy of being. And perhaps we can think about the long poem as a creation that can be read from the middle or something that we can, just get in. And it's not long anymore. It's something else. It's a different spatial arrangement or something.
Tell.
I think, should we just keep search?
Yeah. I'm wondering if the text needs a translator, meaning the vocal is part of the poem, consequently, my poem is not yours. And the second thing, what would you do with a throw of the dice, Madame? Would you read it as you just read yours? Yours is not seen, and it has no weight typographically. And the spacing, how do you approach that sort of a text rather than André Breton, used a phone book, and he did whatever he wished to do. What I find, especially in your reading, that the speed is a translation. If I were to read your text, does the text have its own voice? Or is it always the voice of the translator?
Well, my guess is that whatever voice it would have is in the voice of the structure of the units and how the units relate together or blend together or disjoint. I think that's where the voice of this is probably, with all the difference that your reading would bring to it.
I wanted to follow on from something Bruce said, that actually the word that comes to mind in that last exchange is remediation. One could argue, I think that's a really interesting point. So it's about the speed being a translation. But the word I would prefer would be to remediate it, that it's shit. We shouldn't assume that all voices are the same as vocals demonstrate. I would follow on from something Bruce said about the David Foster Wallace. Dan Katz recently wrote an essay on Ben Lerner, and he makes this very provocative, rather tongue-in-cheek observation that he can't quite tell the difference between the novels and the poems, and wonders if the novels were the poems, and justified occasionally the poems are really fictions. And it strikes me that one of the things that we're circulating around in this conversation is the way that the very long poems start to become kind of hard to recognize. They become generically porous. It's not quite clear that they are any longer recognizable as a particular kind of text. And of course, historically, the reason we don't have more Iliads is because we've had the rise of fiction, which has taken a big part of the space, the literary space. So I guess where I go with that is just to invite some. I'm curious as to your response to the notion that the long poem is a very unstable genre, and we don't quite have labels.
saying at the very beginning, talking about trying to define, right before you got there, trying to define what the long poem is, but this is making it like a, you know, a separate genre
Yeah.
in a sense. It's no longer, you know, poem-y
Yeah, right.
in some ways.
Any thoughts?
Well, just really quickly, because I want to hear what other people want to ask, but you know, I think that if we take the long view of genre as changing from sort of appropriate form to appropriate topic, but it could be in different material. You could have pastoral drama, pastoral poem, pastoral painting, but our sense now that the materiality, the material form of something is part of its genre. You squint and you look on the page and say, oh yeah, that's a lyric. That it's hard for me to think of you know, a 200-page prose block text that is not narrative. Right? I can think of all kinds of things that happen in experimental fiction, but it's still fiction. However things are messed with. But this isn't novel-length, non-narrative prose doesn't have very many siblings.
So you're using narrative as a distinction.
I think as you start to ask that question, I think that
And
becomes
then
forward.
where does this place all those many books? There's a whole world of narrative there. You're not trying to get any just wouldn't know quite
Well, and those now don't fit in very. I mean, they're not read much anymore.
Sordello, I talked about Sordello.
Yeah.
Emily, you want to say something?
Yeah, this is a comment for Craig. One thing that emerges, knowing that you were working with a dictionary, is the tyranny of alphabetizing. And there's something very political about retraversing a reference work in a way that reveals how dynamic its individual units are and how contingent that ordering process is in the way it's presented. I guess I was wondering how those considerations might inform your choice of material to start with, and if that was, you know, and your composition.
Well, one of the things I love about dictionaries is ostensibly, right, the dictionary is supposed to be all about referent, but its structure is entirely this, you know, chance signifier. So this is from the first half of the project. The second half restages this with a different dictionary, and it's very different. It sounds very different, and you get, you know, I mean, part of what comes out of this is, I mean, this is not a revelation. This is obvious, but the particulars are interesting to watch how. You know, how political the Oxford English Dictionary is, and how it class. It listens about special kinds of horses and social class etiquette and things like that come out. Whereas there's a kind of the very first proto-Websters for the second half, and you just have clipped phrases, and it's very worried about other kinds of politics. That's part of it.
That was exactly my question, is which were the dictionaries you used and what were the kind of political implications of each of those choices?
I think we have time for one more, Tim.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this narrative thing, because I was thinking earlier when you talked about the dictionary, well, I'm going to see it as an epic, and I was thinking, well, it's because it's not narrative, but it's encyclopedic in a way. And so when you take away narrative, what happens to the long poem, which you guys are demonstrating, and I was thinking about what gets digitized then, or how it's organized, and I was thinking about how it's exhaustion in two ways, because the compulsion seeds in both poems is to exhaust something to a totality, right? To have it be complete. So that way it's like the epic, right? It's trying to, like, in the opposite way, but it can't do it, right? It's because narrative gave that false sense of closure. Without it, you fail, which goes back to your thing about failing, is that you get exhausted, right? And you collapse before you actually exhaust this, you know, this, even a sentence made of, like Bob was using, you know, a handful of words and trying to just complete it, and it's like waves, you know, there's just another one and another one and another one. So,
Well, before we all collapse from exhaustion, I think we should close the proceedings. It is 6:30.